Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of my podcast. In this podcast, I intend to do a deep dive into all of the 106 sessions of the Law of One as offered by the humble messenger Ra. I have read all 106 sessions at least 36 times, and I have a holistic grasp of the philosophy from focusing on studying it for over 12 years now. Of course, I do not have an undistorted understanding of this philosophy. That is impossible. However, I really try my best to see what Ra is saying without letting my own distortions cloud the concepts they were trying to offer. Before I found the Law of One, I didn't really have an ideology of my own, so I'm not trying to fit it into some pre-existing spiritual framework. Ra's teachings essentially are my spiritual framework, and as I've expanded that, I've found that they encompass almost all spiritual frameworks, which is what makes these books really so special. Now, this is not an introduction to the Law of One. And if for some reason my podcast is the first time you've heard of these books, I would suggest and request that you hit pause and go read the actual books in Ra's own words on your own. You can download the books in PDF form from llresearch.org, or you can read them at lawofone.info with a searchable interface. I will put both links in the description. And I know that's a big ask, as the material is very dense, but I just think it's better for one to have their own conceptualization of what Ra has to say before taking in someone else's conceptualization. I'm making this more as a resource for students who have already read the Law of One, but want to go a bit deeper or to have more context. I believe it is at this point that I should emphasize that you cannot take this material in at a deep level without a daily or near-daily meditation practice, because metaphysical information needs to be processed through the right side of the brain. And as Ra says, we need to learn how to reverse the analytical process, and the best and most efficient way to do that is to sit in silent meditation with the self. So, if you haven't read the Ra material before, and you aren't meditating regularly, try doing both of those things before you come back and listen to this podcast. If that's not something you want to do, obviously I'm not trying to gatekeep anything, but we're going to be going very deep, and I'm going to be referencing content that comes up later in the books before we get to those portions of the material. So it may just be a lot to try to take all of this in from my perspective if this is your first time. Either way, I will again suggest that a daily meditation practice is a necessary component to studying this material and getting anything useful from it. So please try to find a way to do that. The benefits are too good to leave on the table. So with all that out of the way, since this is not an introduction to the books, I won't be offering an introduction to the books or the philosophy or cosmology. Hopefully you already have some idea of what we're going to be talking about, so I'm just going to jump in. I will be reading each question and answer and commenting on them, offering as much detail and nuance as I can. So let's get started. So session 1 begins with Ra making their first contact with the group, obviously. Carla was doing a training session with a student named Leonard, who happened to also be there, and Jim was not in the room until a short while later when he arrives home, and there is text that denotes when that happens. But this is Ra's first time making contact, and this is the first thing that they have to say. I am Ra. I have not spoken through this instrument before. We had to wait until she was precisely tuned, as we send a narrow band vibration. We greet you in the love and in the light of our infinite Creator. We have watched your group. We have been called to your group, for you have a need for the diversity of experiences and channeling which go with a more intensive, or as you might call it, advanced approach to the system of studying the patterns of the illusions of your body, your mind, and your spirit, which you call seeking the truth. We hope to offer you a somewhat different slant upon the information which is always and ever the same. The confederation of planets in the service of the infinite Creator has only one important statement. That statement, my friends, as you know, is all things, all of life, all of the creation is part of one original thought. We will exercise each channel if we are able to. The reception of our beam is a somewhat more advanced feat than some of the more broad vibration channels opened by other members for more introductory and intermediate work. Let us for a moment consider thought. What is it, my friends, to take thought? Took you then thought today? What thoughts did you think today? What thoughts were part of the original thought today? In how many of your thoughts did the creation abide? Was love contained? And was service freely given? You are not part of a material universe. You are part of a thought. You are dancing in a ballroom in which there is no material. You are dancing thoughts. You move your body, your mind, and your spirit in somewhat eccentric patterns, for you have not completely grasped the concept that you are part of the original thought. So, this is Ra's opening statement. They really want to emphasize the concept that all of our creation is generated from the thoughts that we think. And there are many different spiritual practices that reveal this same truth. And Ra just goes much deeper than just, your thoughts create reality. Well, what does that mean? And what do our actions do? And that, the actions being our body, and what does our spirit want as the creator? So they really emphasize more the mind, body, spirit connection rather than focusing on just the mind, which is what a lot of thought-based spiritual modalities really encourage. So here in this next part, they are going to try to speak through Dawn, and they are going to try to speak through Leonard, but Carla's really the only one who can connect with them. The thing is that Carla was actually really resistant to Ra. Carla was really an open channel. She saw it as a service. She enjoyed performing the service of allowing various confederation entities to use her as an instrument. She would usually be open to new entities as long as they passed her very strong challenge. And her way of challenging was to invoke Jesus Christ. And it's not that Jesus Christ is just a magical word or a magical thought form, but Carla was very, very devoted to Jesus and Jesus's teachings, which are very much about opening the heart in compassion and acceptance. And she would not channel anything that would go against Jesus's teachings or any of the positive portions of the Bible that were important to her in any way. That was very important to her. It was like a brick wall, and that's really what challenging as far as channeling means, is having a barrier of what is okay and what is not okay. And to her, it had to align with Jesus. So when Ra first contacted Carla, she was kind of reluctant because she could tell that something different was contacting her. And there's actually a portion of the Tilting at Windmills book, which is an interview between Carla and Jim before Carla's passing, about the first time that Ra contacted her. And I'd like to read that as well because I think it's very interesting. So Carla says, "I was going to teach that day, and I was about halfway through the session when there was a very powerful sort of knock, knock, knock on my inner door. I said, 'Is there a spirit that wants to work through me?' I kept getting, 'I am Ra.' I'm thinking, I don't want to talk to a Ra, because the only Ra I knew was from mythology, Egyptian mythology, and I thought it was a fairly negatively oriented entity. It was a god of war, Horus, the hawk-headed god and all that, not something I wanted to encourage. So I challenged with every ounce of energy in my little body, and I kept saying, 'Do you come in the name of Jesus the Christ?' They were indignant. It was like, 'Do you think that you're the only people that have Jesus? Do you think you're the only planet that has Jesus? Come on. Of course we come in the name of Jesus the Christ. Of course. What else is there when you're talking about love? We come in the name of Jesus Christ, no problem. Get on with it, girl.' I challenged 3 times, and they were very strongly affirmative. 'Yes, of course, we come in the name of Jesus the Christ. We come in the name of love.' And I thought, I can't go wrong with that. So I said, okay. So Carla was still, at the very beginning of this, pretty reluctant. So Ra attempts to channel through Dawn, and they say, 'We would at this time transfer to an instrument known as Dawn. I am Ra.' There's a long pause, and Ra, through Carla, says, 'I am Ra. I am again with this instrument. We are close to initiating a contact, but we are having difficulty penetrating a certain mental tension and distraction that is somewhat characteristic of this channel. We will therefore describe the type of vibration which is being sent. The instrument will find us entering the energy field at a slight angle towards the back of the top of the head in a narrow but strong area of intensity. We are not able to offer any conditioning due to our own transmitting limitations. Therefore, if the instrument can feel this particular effect, he may then speak our thoughts as they come to him. We will again attempt this contact. I am Ra. So when they speak of conditioning, this is a part of conscious channeling that Dawn and Carla's group was very familiar with. Essentially, the entities contacting the instruments would sort of force the body to do something, whether force the tongue to move, force the throat to make a noise, something that gave the instrument confidence that there was actually another presence there that they were connecting with. But Ra says that they're not able to do that, that that's not how they operate. But if you can feel the intense feeling that we are sending to you, you can try to speak. However, there's another long pause, and Ra says, this instrument is resisting our contact. However, we assure her that we are satisfied that the contact with the one known as Dawn is not at this time preferable to that instrument. We will therefore move on to the one known as Leonard. Again, we caution the instrument that it is a narrow-band communication which is felt as a vibration entering the aura. We will now transfer this contact. I am Ra. Then we have another long pause. Leonard is not able to connect with Ra either. Only Carla is able to really make this connection to Ra. So then Ra comes back and says, I am Ra. We greet you once more in the love and in the light of our infinite Creator. We ask that you be patient with us, for we are a difficult channel to receive. However, we may perhaps add some dimensions to your understanding. At this time, we would be glad to attempt to speak to any subject or question which those entities in the room may have potential use in the requesting. So, ultimately, I think Ra knew that it was only Carla that they were going to use as an instrument, but she was so resistant at the onset that for her peace of mind, they attempted to come through Dawn and Leonard, but it just wasn't going to work because they didn't have the proper configurations that Carla had. Later, they talk about how it was her recent experience going into trance that allowed her to be able to make this contact because a friend had died recently, and her husband, they had made a promise before she passed that Carla would try to be a medium for her deceased soul, and she did that. She did that twice, and it was, by all accounts, successful, but she really didn't like it. When she came out of the trance, she felt so worn out and worn down that she was like, I can't do this anymore. But it was her ability to be able to go into that trance state that was the final step to initiate the Ra contact. So anyway, Ra jumps through the hoops for Carla, even though they knew it wasn't going to happen with Dawn or Leonard, but they tried. So anyway, now we get to the first question from Dawn. And Dawn says, it seems members of the Confederation have a specific purpose. Is this true with you? And if so, what is your purpose? And Ra says, I am Ra. We communicate now. We too have our place. We are not those of the love or of the light. We are those who are of the law of one. In our vibration, the polarities are harmonized, the complexities are simplified, and the paradoxes have their solution. We are one. That is our nature and our purpose. We are old upon your planet and have served with varying degrees of success in transmitting the law of one, of unity, of singleness to your peoples. We have walked your earth. We have seen the faces of your peoples. This is not so with many of the entities of the Confederation. We found it was not efficacious. However, we then felt the great responsibility of staying in the capacity of removing the distortions and powers that had been given to the law of one. We will continue in this until your, shall we say, cycle is appropriately ended. If not this one, then the next. We are not a part of time and thus are able to be with you in any of your times. Does this give you enough information from which to extract our purpose, my brother? So, when Ra says we're not those of the love or the light, what they are saying is that The previously channeled confederation entities that this group has worked with were either fourth density or fifth density, fourth density being of the love, and fifth density being of the light. But in sixth density, which is where Ra's from, the love and the light are harmonized and are in a perpetual balancing state. Sixth density is working to balance these two energies. So that is what they mean when they say we are not of the love or of the light, we are of the law of one. It's not that they aren't coming with love or light, it's just that they're not fourth or fifth density, they're sixth density. Then they go on to mention that they have actually come to Earth as Ra and tried to teach us, which isn't a common thing for Confederation members to do, like the other entities who have been channeled by Carla and Dawn had not walked the Earth in the same way that Ra has. They mentioned that they did not think it was successful when they actually showed up and tried to teach us. They've contacted us in other ways with varying degrees of success, but actually walking among us was not efficacious. So they created many distortions in our social memory complex by doing that, and thus they have made this contact with Carla and Dawn and ultimately Jim to try to remove the distortions that they had placed upon our collective consciousness. So that's what Ra's doing here. They came in the past, they created some really major distortions that have plagued us for thousands of years, and they want to try to offer a less distorted version of what they were trying to do back then. And this is the best way that they know to do it. They're not going to come and walk on the Earth again because that went horribly wrong, so they're being channeled by an instrument, and therefore we get the law of one. So the next questions go, Dawn says, yes, it does. Give him information, thank you. And then Ra says, we appreciate your vibration. Is there another query? And Dawn says, I've heard of the name Ra in connection with the Egyptians. Are you connected with that Ra in any way? And Ra says, I am Ra. Yes, the connection is congruency. May we elucidate? And Dawn says, please do. And Ra says, what do you not understand? And Dawn says, could you give me a little more detail about your role with the Egyptians? And Ra says, I am Ra. The identity of the vibration Ra is our identity. We as a group, or what you would call a social memory complex, made contact with the race of your planetary kind, which you call Egyptians. Others from our density made contact at the same time in South America, and the so-called lost cities were their attempts to contribute to the law of one. We spoke to one who heard and understood and was in a position to decree the law of one. However, the priests and peoples of that era quickly distorted our message, robbing it of the, shall we say, compassion with which unity is informed by its very nature. Since it contains all, it cannot abhor any. When we were no longer able to have appropriate channels through which to enunciate the law of one, we removed ourselves from the now hypocritical position which we had allowed ourselves to be placed in, and other myths, shall we say, other standings having more to do with polarity and the things of your vibrational complex again took over in that particular society complex. Does this form a sufficient amount of information, or could we speak further? So here Ra's talking about the time they came to Egypt, and mentions that another sixth density social memory complex made contact in South America at the same time, which is where we get all of the pyramids that exist in Central and South America, and that we spoke to one who heard and understood, and later they reveal that that was Akhenaten, and that he was able to attempt to decree the law of one. I think when we look back at that time in Egypt from the current standpoint, it looks like a major time of upheaval and dissatisfaction among people, but apparently while he was alive, people were willing to participate in the concepts of the law of one, but as soon as he died, they just went back to what they were doing before, which is many gods and a very polarized, separated experience of spiritual understanding. Ross says that the priests and peoples of that era quickly distorted the message, robbing it of the compassion with which unity is informed of by its very nature. Since it contains all, it cannot abhor any. So they're saying that, the Creator is compassionate, and that unity requires compassion because you can't reject any portion of the unified self if you are actually the unified self. So the next thing that Dawn says is 1.6, and it's inaudible. They recorded this on a tape recorder. Sometimes Dawn spoke too softly to get picked up for the audio on the tape deck. So once in a while we get blank parts like this. We don't know what Dawn said, but Ra responds, "Is there another query?" And then the next question, 1.7, is also lost. We don't have the audio for what Dawn asked, but we do have Ra's response. And Ra says, "I am Ra. Consider, if you will, that the universe is infinite. This has yet to be proven or disproven, but we can assure you that there is no end to yourselves, your understanding, what you would call your journey of seeking, or your perceptions of the creation. That which is infinite cannot be many, for manyness is a finite concept. To have infinity, you must identify or define that infinity as unity. Otherwise, the term does not have any referent or meaning. In an infinite creator, there is only unity. You have seen simple examples of unity. You have seen the prism which shows all colors stemming from the sunlight. This is a simplistic example of unity. In truth, there is no right or wrong. There is no polarity, for all will be, as you say, reconciled at some point in your dance through the mind-body-spirit complex which you amuse yourself by distorting in various ways at this time. This distortion is not in any case necessary. It is chosen by each of you as an alternative to understanding the complete unity of thought which binds all things. You are not speaking of similar or somewhat like entities or things. You are everything, every being, every emotion, every event, every situation. You are unity. You are infinity. You are love, light, light, love. You are. This is the law of one. May we enunciate this law in more detail." So, obviously this is more of Ra trying to transmit the law of one, which is that there is only unity. We are all of this. We have just chosen to distort ourselves into a very, 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 very small portion of infinity, but we are still part of infinity, and we can undistort ourselves with our choices to seek unity from the current distorted human self that we are. But to do that, we do need to somewhat conceptualize the infinite nature of our reality. So question 1.8 is also lost. Whatever Dawn says is inaudible. And Ross says, "Is there another query at this time?" And in section 1.9, Dawn asks, "Can you say anything about the coming planetary changes?" And at this point, there's a lot of background noise that starts on the tape, which is when Jim arrives back home. He was getting groceries or something like that. He had just moved in with Dawn and Carla like a couple weeks before Ra makes contact. So he was a necessary component to all of the necessary vibrations coming together to make this contact possible. But he wasn't actually there when this initial contact started, but he did get there in the middle of this first session. So there's some noise because Jim arrives right when Dawn asks this question about planetary changes, which we will find out is not really something Dawn should be asking about, but it is sort of, how do you say, like part of the culture of channeling to ask about planetary changes. At least it was at that time. It was kind of it felt very important to see if we could get more information about potential future disasters that were going to happen to the planet, because, if we can avert these disasters, right, or at least be prepared for these disasters, but ultimately asking those types of questions creates an opening for negative entities to come in and make false predictions and instigate fear and anticipatory worry about the future when we're really supposed to just be living in the now and dealing with things as they come to us and not being obsessively preoccupied with potential future events. And also, the future events are probability vortices, which means that the more attention that is given to these concepts widens the vortex for the possibility of these things to occur. So by saying there's going to be an earthquake in San Francisco in 3 years from today, then you have more thoughts going towards that potential. But really, the purpose of the negative entity giving this information is to lie so that the channel becomes less trusted. So people will say, oh, this never happened. And of course, that doesn't happen every time. Lots of times, cognitive dissonance creates a condition where even if these events that were prophesied don't happen, then you believe even more, because the human brain is a very interesting thing. So Dawn asks about the planetary changes. Jim arrives, creates a bunch of noise on the tape, and Ra says, I am Ra. I preferred to wait until this instrument had again reached the proper state of depth of singleness or one-pointedness before we spoke. The changes are very, very trivial. We do not concern ourselves with the conditions which bring about harvest. And so the next question is Dawn saying, another question, is it possible to create any acceleration of understanding in other entities, or are all efforts by the individual on himself accelerating his understanding? In other words, if an individual tries to act as a catalyst in general to increase the awareness of planetary consciousness, is he doing nothing but acting upon himself? Or is it possible? And the rest of Dawn's question is inaudible. So, Ra says, I am Ra. We shall answer your question in 2 parts, both of which are important equally. First, you must understand that the distinction between yourself and others is not visible to us. We do not consider that a separation exists between the consciousness-raising efforts of the distortion which you project as a personality and the distortion which you project as an other personality. Thus, to learn is the same as to teach, unless you are not teaching what you are learning, in which case you have done you/they little or no good. This understanding should be pondered by your mind-body-spirit complex, as it is a distortion which plays a part in your experiences at this nexus. So, through this first part here, Ra is saying that we only see the collective consciousness that you experience on your planet, and therefore, whatever you do for yourself is helping others on that level. However, if you aren't actually embodying what you've learned, which is teaching what you've learned by embodying it and just existing as an aware being, then you aren't doing anything. So, you can't just learn metaphysics and have that have any effect on the collective consciousness. You actually have to do the work of embodying that awareness, and then that actually does have an effect on the collective consciousness. So this next part is also lost audio. It was transcribed once, but then the tape that had this portion was taped over. So this is just the only transcription. This material has been re-listened and retranscribed and found there were many errors and dropped words and dropped sessions and missed things, but this part has not been able to be retranscribed, is what that means. But it's still a very interesting thing that Ra says. So Ra goes on to say, to turn to the second part of our response, we may state our understanding, limited though it is. Group individuated consciousness is that state of sharing understanding with the other distortions of mind-body-spirit complexes which are within the evident reach of the mind-body-spirit complex individual or group. Thus, we are speaking to you and accepting both our distortions and your own in order to enunciate the laws of creation, more especially the law of one. We are not available to many of your peoples, for this is not an easily understood way of communication or type of philosophy. However, our very being is hopefully a poignant example of both the necessity and the near hopelessness of attempting to teach. Each of those in this group is striving to use, digest, and diversify the information which we are sending this instrument into the channels of the mind-body-spirit complex without distortion. The few whom you will illuminate by sharing your light are far more than enough reason for the greatest possible effort. To serve one is to serve the all. Therefore, we offer the question back to you to state that indeed it is the only activity worth doing, to learn, teach, or to teach, learn. There is nothing else which is of aid in demonstrating the original thought except your very being, and the distortions that come from the unexplained, inarticulate, or mystery-clad being are many. Thus, to attempt to discern and weave your way through as many group mind-body-spirit distortions as possible among your peoples in the course of your teaching is a very good effort to make. We can speak no more valiantly of your desire to serve. So, here Ra is saying that it is almost hopeless trying to teach others, trying to show them the way, trying to help them expand their awareness. But it isn't completely hopeless, because any effort you make does help on some level. It might not help on the individual level, but the more people that you interact with, the more opportunities you do have to help on the individual level. Sort of a law of averages. Eventually someone will hear you. So, just trying to embody your spiritual self and existing as that embodied self in the proximity of others is really the best thing that you can do, and it does help. It does help. And it's a good effort to make. So, hence why I'm here. I'm trying to embody this portion of Ra's teachings, to try to share what I know, to try to put it out there for people to find. If they like it, cool. If they don't, whatever. But trying is important. Trying is an act of service in itself. So, yeah. And another thing that Ra says here is that the distortions that come from the inarticulate and mystery-clad being are many, thus to discern and then weave your way through these mind-body-spirit complexes, a good service to offer. What they're saying is that the inarticulate, mystery-clad, undiscerning being offers many distortions as they move through other people. But the more that you seek the mystery, the more that you attempt to discern, the less distorted you are. Therefore, you're embodying a more pure and articulate version of the Creator and offering that to the group mind-body-spirit complexes that you work with. So ultimately, the work that you do does go forward, and to not do the work is essentially allowing more distortions in the collective, which of course is fine. We're all here to dance with our distortions and to experience confusion and a world of mystery. But if you do the work, then you are able to help others on some level, even if it's not obvious. Ross says, may we speak in any other capacity upon this subject? And 1.11 says, will you be available for communication? Can we call on you in the future? And Ra says, I am Ra. We have good contact with this instrument because of her recent experiences with trance. She is able to communicate our thoughts in your future. However, we advise care in disturbing the channel for a few moments, and then the proper procedure for aiding an instrument who has, to some extent, the need of re-entering the mind-body-spirit complex, which the instrument has chosen for the life experience of this time-space. Do you understand how to nurture this instrument? And obviously, this is the first time they've done this, at least channeled Ra. They've channeled lots before, but this is a special case. So Ra sets up Dawn to be able to ask this question because Ra really doesn't want to offer information without being solicited for that information, because that's the way that they best protect Dawn's free will and our free will. So Dawn says, no, could you explain it? And Ra says, we suggest first a brief period of silence, then the repetition of the instrument's vibratory complex of sound in your density, which you call name. Repeat until an answer is obtained. Then the laying on of the hands at the neck region for a brief period so that the instrument may recharge batteries which are not, shall we say, full of the essence of this particular field at this time. And finally, a gift of water into which the love of all present has been given. This will restore the entity, for her distortions contain great sensitivity towards the vibrations of love, and the charged water will affect comfort. Do you now understand? And Dawn says, not completely. And Ra says, I am Ra. We search your mind to find the vibration all rack. And that is Carla backwards, by the way. That is what Dawn called Carla. It is this vibration from you which contains the largest amount of what you would call love. Others would call this entity Carla. The charging of the water is done by those present placing their hands over the glass and visualizing the power of love entering the water. This will charge that very effective medium with those vibrations. This instrument is, at this time, quite fatigued. However, her heart is such that she continues to remain open to us and useful as a channel. This is why we have spent the time-space explaining how the distortions of what you may call fatigue may be ameliorated. Under no circumstances should this instrument be touched until she has responded to her name. I do not wish to take this instrument beyond her capacity for physical energy. It grows low. Therefore, I must leave this instrument. I leave you in the glory and peace of unity. Go forth in peace, rejoicing in the power of the one Creator. I am Ra. So, there at the end, Ra is obviously instructing them how to care for Carla once she re-enters her body because her entire consciousness is removed from her body while Ra is using her as an instrument. So they can't touch her until she comes back into her body. They can't turn on the lights until she comes back into her body. I'm not sure they actually said that time, but they do eventually say that you shouldn't turn on the lights before she comes into her body too. Yeah, Carla was very open, very willing to serve. One thing about Carla is that her heart was so open that she was willing to give of herself until she was depleted, which is a green ray distortion. The blue ray wisdom is about balancing that with the understanding of your own physical limitations. And Carla didn't really want none of that. She didn't want to acknowledge her physical limitations. She just wanted to give and give and give and give. So Ra was basically saying that you and me, Dawn, we have to be able to find a way to recognize the energy distortions of Carla so that we don't deplete her beyond her capacity, because otherwise she would let us, and with her free will, she would let us do that, but we don't want to do that. So in the next session, we get more details about how to care for Carla and protect her energy and to protect the contact and all of that. But this is the first session. Carla essentially did channel this session consciously, not completely in trance. Her retelling is that she would go in and out of consciousness more than she did in her usual conscious channeling. So she was kind of blinking in and out to do this first session. In session 2, they instruct the group how to put Carla into trance so that she is protected and safe, and Ra has full access to her as an instrument without her mind complex coming in and distorting it. Because we saw at the beginning, her mind complex was very resistant to the contact, and that was creating a situation where Ra was trying to channel through Dawn and trying to channel through Leonard. But after session 2, Carla's mind is not a part of the material at all. In fact, Dawn doesn't actually let Carla read any of it until session 22, give or take, because Dawn didn't want to let Carla's mind influence this at all. And then around session 22, Dawn asks, does her mind influence this? And Ross says, no, she's not. Her mind complex isn't a part of this at all. She's completely removed. We're just using her body, mostly her voice, to state our words in our way. So, yeah, that is the first session of the Law of One. I hope that it was interesting for you to hear a little bit more detail about what was going on and a little more context. I have read most of the additional materials that LL Research has released over the years. As I mentioned earlier, the Tilting at Windmills book, which is a very long interview between Carla and Jim, with Gary interviewing them and asking them specific questions about the contact and about their lives. And like I said, it really just gives a lot of context. And then Carla also has her own books, like A Wanderer's Handbook, A Channeling Handbook, Living the Law of One 101. These are all really great sources of information to, again, put into context what this specific group was doing and their own personal distortions that would bring about certain questions and things like their history with channeling and all that good stuff. So I'm going to continue to do this with every session, to do my best to read through the question and answer, because I also think that can be helpful to hear somebody who is familiar with this language and these concepts, to read them in a way that might offer a little bit more understanding, just hearing the words phrased through a conscious mind speaking, if that makes sense. So thank you very much for listening. By the way, my name is Jade. And yeah, I've been sharing my understanding of the Law of One for a while now, and this is my next project. So follow, do whatever you need to do to maintain updates if you are interested in hearing more. And I'm humbled to be trusted enough to be given a little piece of your time. So if you would like to join me in the future, I look forward to that. Thank you so much.